front-end web development course. In this class, we're going to be talking about SQL, Structured Query Language. SQL is a standard language for accessing and manipulating databases. Just like you have programming languages, you also have a language for manipulating databases. Remember that when our backend app was communicating with the front-end app, one of the challenges we had was, where do we store our data? This is where SQL comes in, and databases. So what is a database? A database is an organized collection of structured information or data typically stored electronically in a computer system. Now, if you look at the image that we have right here, you would see this container here. This is usually the depiction for a database. It looks like it has a lid. And when you open this lid, you can easily just store data inside it. Store data. And then when you are done storing data, you close the lid again. This is how a database works. It's a place where your backend app can always go to store data that it has gotten from third-party services or from your front-end client, maybe your web app or your mobile app. Then it stores it in this DB. When there is need for it again, opens up the DB lid and then takes out the data, returns it to whoever needs it. It could do a bit of manipulation before returning it. There are several types of databases depending on how data is stored, retrieved, and modified. But there are two major types, which are relational and non-relational databases. For the purpose of this tutorial, we'll focus on relational databases. Relational databases always look like a table. All the data in it would always come in form of a table. A relational database, also known as a SQL database, is used to store data in tables. This means that the data is organized into rows and columns. And if you look at this sample table in this school database, this student table is certainly one of the tables in the database. So it has columns here. You could see this is column 1 for roll number, column 2 for name, column 3 for class, column 4 for date of birth, column 4 for gender, column 5, right? Yeah, for CD, column 6 for marks. Now, every data or information in this table will be one row. So this is our row. We have rows. Then we have columns. Now, the first row has all the data that we need from each column for a student called Nanda. The second row has all the information we need from each column. So every information you need will be a column header. And then you pass in the data for those column headers in the row. So for row 1, we have all the information for Nanda, who is a student. The second row for Sarab. Third row for Sonal. We have their names, their classes, date of birth, gender, city, and marks. Examples of relational databases are MySQL, PostgreSQL, MariaDB, Microsoft SQL Server, and Oracle database. Just like in cars, where we have different brand makers, it is the same with relational databases. You can use whichever suits your purpose or whichever your company, the company you work for, would be using. But for the purpose of this tutorial, we'll be focusing on MySQL. And in this MySQL, we're going to be doing two things. We're going to be installing my SQL server for saving the data. So MySQL will be the one saving the data on your machine. And then we're going to install my SQL workbench. Install my SQL workbench for interacting with this MySQL server. So let's get to work. To install MySQL, just go to your browser and type download MySQL, and then I'm sure your first result would be the one from www.mysql.com and from the downloads page. Now in the downloads page, you'll be installing the community server. And take note, if you're working on a Mac OS like me, you're going to select Mac OS as your operating system. If you're working on Windows, you select Microsoft Windows as your operating system. Linux, you do same. So I choose Mac OS. OS version, I choose macOS 13, ARM 64-bit because I have the Apple Silicon chip, and then I download the DMG archive. If you have an account, you can log in. If you want an account with Oracle, you can sign up. But for me, I just want to start my download. Okay, so I'll download my SQL and we'll wait for it to come. SQL. Let's proceed to install it. So I double click on the downloaded file, and then I also double click on this new prompt. I allow. This prompt is similar to what you would also see on Microsoft Windows, and this is the usual installation prompt for MySQL. Now, I would want you to take note of this configuration step. It's very important because you would be setting up the root password for your MySQL server here. Now we're using strong password encryption, and we're clicking on next. It's going to ask us to please enter a password for the root user. And the root user here is the administrator or the owner of this computer, we assume, the person downloading it right now. So ensure you don't forget the password you use, and then you click on next, finish. Now we have successfully installed MySQL server on our local machine. That is the computer you're working on right now. The next thing we need to install from our instructional material is to install MySQL workbench. And if you go back to type download MySQL, you also see that MySQL workbench is one of the packages available for download on mysql.com. Why are we installing MySQL workbench? MySQL by default cannot be visualized. It is just a data store. Someone is just telling you, well, you have 500 students, but it's really difficult for you to visualize them because normally to interact with your MySQL server or your MySQL database, you need to use the command line, and it could be a bit of a daunting task for a beginner. And this is why MySQL Workbench has come to your rescue. MySQL Workbench would give you a visual overview of what or of how the underlying MySQL server is and how it operates. So you can easily interact with your MySQL server without writing SQL scripts. Then as you proceed into learning SQL, you start writing SQL scripts whilst you're trying to use MySQL Workbench to learn how to generate more complex and advanced SQL scripts. So now let's download MySQL Workbench. I'll choose macOS as my operating system. I choose ARM 64-bit, and then I proceed to download. Yeah, I go to my downloads folder and double click on MySQL Workbench, and then I'll be asked to move this into my applications folder. Okay, it's copying this application, and I should be able to start up a MySQL Workbench client in a few seconds from now. Now that MySQL Workbench has been copied into our applications on my macOS, I go to my applications folder, look for MySQL Workbench, I double click on it, and it opens this up for me. So now we have our MySQL Workbench. We want to connect this workbench to the MySQL server that we downloaded at first on this local machine. So how do we do that? We go to MySQL connections and we click on this plus icon. Let's call it Rise Academy Tutorial. Then we come here. You remember we set a root password when we're installing the MySQL server. This is what tells MySQL Workbench that you're the owner of that server and you have access to connect to it. And this is why your MySQL server needs to be very secure. Someone else could sit on his computer in his house and connect remotely to the MySQL that is sitting on your server if he has access to the root user or root user's password. So I put in my root user's password, and I press OK. I test connection, and I've successfully made the MySQL connection. So I press OK. Now, to go into that server, remember that we've installed the server, but we've not gone into it. Now we are using MySQL Workbench to go into it. This is the connection to that server that we just created. I double click on it, and I have this kind of view. Now, this is my MySQL server, the one we installed, and you see that it is empty, right? Now, the next thing we want to do is we want to create a database, and then we're going to be creating tables inside that database. So the first database we want to create, we'll call it schools, or we'll call it SchoolDB, because we are building an application, an API that will be dealing with a school application. It will have tables, students, and the likes. So we'll come here and we'll click on this icon to create a new schema. We call it school_db, and then come down to the bottom right and click on apply. Now, if you take note of this, you would see that MySQL Workbench has created or generated an SQL script for us. This is what we would have normally written on our terminal and run it directly on our MySQL server. But because, like I said, for a beginner it could be daunting, would allow MySQL Workbench automatically create this script for us. But as we grow in this course, as we go along in this course, we'll start creating our own script, and you could even decide not to use MySQL Workbench again. So MySQL Workbench has created this script, and it says create schema SchoolDB. What it's simply saying is create a database and call it SchoolDB. And when you click apply, go to the left, you would see that you now have a database here called SchoolDB. Now, in your database, you could have as many tables as you want. So you can expand this SchoolDB by clicking on this drop down. Right click on tables, take note, and then select create table. Now the first table we want to create in this our schema or database is the students DB, or the students table. So we'll come here, we'll call the name of this table students, and then we are going to give it a few column headers. If you check what we have here, we have roll number, name, class, date of birth, gender, city, and marks. But before we start that, let's have the first column, roll number. Now, there is a column here called data type that tells us this column, what kind of data should it be expecting. As you can see here, this is just expecting numbers. So in my SQL, we have a few data types, and I'll just talk about 3 or 4 for now. My SQL data types, just like any programming language, MySQL too has data types, and the first one we'll talk about is integer, int, simply numbers. We have varchar, that's variable character, and then a particular number here. This is for strings with a character limit. So if I say varchar varchar 255, I am saying this column will take in strings that is less than or equal to 255. It will not take in any string that is greater than 255. Let me make it easier. Let's say this is varchar 5. I am saying any word less than or equal to 5 should be accepted. Greater than 5 should not be accepted. So my name is Damilare. If I insert this name in that column on the table, it will not go because Damilare is already longer than 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. But if I write Dami, then Dami will pass because Dami is less than 5. We have integer variable character. We also have the date type. We also have the date time. It just takes in date, only date. And then we have the Boolean. that we call the tiny hint. So this is either yes or no, 0 for no, 1 for yes. This is what it can take in as value. So now let's go back to our table, and we have our roll number. So the data type here would be int, and then because we want to be using that roll number to access any other column in this row, we will call it our primary key. That means this is the key, this is the most important key of all the data here. As long as I have this key, I can find any other data. For example, give me the name of the student with row number 1, Nanda. Give me the class of the student with row number 1, X. Because it's possible that 2 students might be bearing Nanda. And if I say give me the class of the students with name Nanda, I would not know which of the Nanda to provide. But roll numbers can be unique, and that is why they are primary. Once it's primary key, it becomes unique. So I will say this is a primary key, and then I'll say it is auto increment. You will soon understand what I mean by auto increment. What I mean is I would not be inserting it manually in my table. My SQL would automatically increment and add roll number for any data I input as a row. So that is roll number. The next column is name. The next column is class. The next column is date of birth. As you can see, these are variable characters, varchar, date of birth, and the data type here would be dates. Then gender, city, and marks. Gender, let's use varchar for now. City, marks, let's also use varchar, and then would apply. Bottom right, you click on apply. But before you apply, take note, you could insist that all of them should not be null, so that when they are providing this data, every of this column must be filled. But if you leave it and you don't mark it that it cannot be null, whoever is inserting the data can decide to either insert or not. To make it a bit interesting, let's ensure that our name is not null. We always expect a name, and we also always expect a class. Others can come in later. Let's also ensure that our marks is also added for every first time this data is imputed into this table. So we'll go down here and we'll click on apply. Take note, it will generate an SQL script for you again. This is what you have manually done. You could have written it as a script. You could have said create a table. Create table school_db the students. The school_db is the database that you created before now. The students is the student table that you want to create now. As you can see here, students. And then these are the columns that you should put. First one, roll number, the data type, if it should be null, if you want it to auto increment, comma, the next column, comma, the next column, comma, the next column, comma, the next column, comma, 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 till the last one. And then you're saying, please make the primary key roll number, so that anytime I want to find anything in this row, I would always use the roll number. But for now, like I said, it might be a bit of a daunting task for you if you're just beginning. So let's still use MySQL workbench to manually do this. And then as we proceed, we'll move into using SQL script to create this on the terminal. Apply. And then now we have a table. How do we view our table? Go back to the left side here in this navigator. When you now expand tables, you would find that students is now a table under the tables drop down. Right click and select rows. You can limit it to 1000. You can decide to limit it to 200 rows. But even as at now, we don't have so many rows. So we have selected all our students. Now take note, this is the script for selecting. But like I said, you can easily just select, right click here and select rows from MySQL workbench. As we proceed, everything we have done here manually, we can do it on a terminal without using this workbench. So now we have selected this table. It has given us roll number, name, class, date of birth, gender, city, marks, but they are all empty because we have not inserted data. Now let's proceed to insert data. Take note, I will not be the one to insert the roll number because I expect my MySQL server to do that for me automatically. Remember when we were creating the table, we said roll number should be auto increment. Now go. I insert name. Oh, sorry, the name should be Nanda. The class would be X, date of birth 1995 0606, 1995-06-06, gender, I'm sure is male, city, Agra, and mark is 551. City, Agra, and mark is 551. Now we can proceed to apply. This is also the script to insert inside the MySQL table. Take note, as we proceed, we would learn the script to create a database, script to create a table and with its attending columns, script to select from a table, script to insert inside the table. This is the script to insert inside the table. It has been generated for us by MySQL Workbench. We proceed to apply. Okay, I think it says fields mark. The field mark doesn't have a default value. That means we were meant to insert something we did not insert. Okay, now let's apply again. It should work. Now, we have been able to create our first row. Please take note of the row number. What happened? MySQL server has automatically created it and given it a value of 1. Let's create another student quickly. Let's call Saurabh. Saurabh, and the class is XII. Date of birth is 1993-05-07. Gender is also male. City is Mumbai, and the mark is 462. Let's apply again. Now we have our second row inside our student table. MySQL has proceeded to give us the roll number again as 2. Now let's make it a bit complicated. We said that the mark must not be null. That means if I insert a table and I do not insert mark or class, if I insert a role, I do not insert mark, class, or name, it will throw me an error. So let's create the third student. My name is Damilare. Let's use me. Damilare, I'm in class. Let me jump class X. We said class must always be there. It must not be null. Okay. Then let me add the mark. I'm the most brilliant. I got 995. Now let's apply this. This is the SQL script. We have said it should insert into this table called students, the name and mark. The values should be Damilare and 995, but we did not ask it to insert class. I remember class must not be null. Now when we apply to throw us an error, there was an error. And what is the error? He said, this is what you asked me to insert. He said, but I have an error. It says the field class does not have a default value. And because it does not have a default value, you have to provide a value. And that's why you have this error. Is that fine? So basically, this is how to use MySQL Workbench to connect to a MySQL server, whether on your local machine or on a remote server. If it's on a remote server, where you are trying to connect here, you would not use this host name. This host name always represents your local machine 127.0.0.1. You would be using an IP address that the owner of the server would give you. You would say use this IP address, use the root password, and use root as your username, or whatever username has been configured for that particular user on the server, and then use the password that also be provided. If you are provided with the right credentials and you apply, you'll be able to connect to MySQL that is on that server. Take note, you can work with any MySQL on any server. It must not be only the one on your local machine. And once you connect, MySQL Workbench will be able to interact with that server by creating, selecting, inserting, updating, and deleting. Thank you.